Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I am joined by a director of a film that, having watched it in the past week, has stayed on my mind since I've seen it, and I am very, very grateful for the opportunity to talk about it. So welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your film, please?
Sure. Thank you, Jen, and it's great to be on your show. And my name is Frances Causey, and I'm the director of Final Fight: When the Trauma of War Comes Home.
As I said, it was I think it's a very important film, and it is a extraordinarily comprehensive introduction to the issue in an extraordinarily efficient time frame. Could you talk a little bit about your journey to the film, like your career and what drew you to this project?
Sure. Well, I started my career with CNN. I was a news producer for 14 years, both in Atlanta and New York. And so I was in a position on the national desk where increasingly what I was doing was kind of being overwhelmed by the technical. So I knew I wanted to start my own documentary. So it was kind of natural for me to go from short form nonfiction, news to long form documentary filmmaking. So I was with CNN from 1987 to 2000. I'm dating myself. And started my own company in 2000 and wanted to make films that really have purpose and films that matter. I'm an accidental kind of activist. I'm not an activist. I describe myself as a filmmaker and journalist. But what happens in the process when you get so close to a subject, like you do with every film, because films are really hard to make. They're very, very hard to make. They take a long time. They take quite a bit of funding. And I was really lucky to find an incredible partner in my executive producer. And this is our third film we've made together. And he came to me and he had hired the gentleman, Travis Hall, who's in the movie, who's done 18 deployments. And rightly so, Cal thought that really deserved some exploration. So we got to know Travis and like with most films that I start out on, I don't know really a whole lot about the subject. And I think for the most part, that's good. My grandfather was an aviator in World War II, but I didn't have through my work at CNN, I had covered the military, but not nearly as intimately and as, in a vulnerable way, look at this subject. Because this is the second mental health film I've made. And, you have to be really careful about mental health films, and because you're speaking to such a vulnerable audience. So I researched the project during COVID. Actually, a little bit before COVID, I started the research, and I thought, gosh, how are we gonna make this film during COVID? And I think we were able to, in one sitting, right, kind of educate the audience on where we've been with PTS, where we are now, and where we need to know. It's one of the great luxuries of film, right? You can condense, as you say, so comprehensive and complicated a subject. You really, if you've done your job right, you really can reduce it down to that. It's a massive story. You could probably have 100 documentaries on it, but I think in our 90 minutes, we covered a lot of ground, hopefully in a very responsible way, and in a way that will inspire people to reach out for help and also support the family and friends of the veterans who are suffering, the service members who are suffering. Because so often, as Dr. Sutton says in the film, she said, when you when you go off to war and you come back a hero and you put your heart and soul into it, the last thing you want to be told is that you're suffering from some disease. I mean, so a lot of times the veterans aren't ready for the help, but the family and friends might be able to learn something from the film, get care of themselves, but also get their loved ones care.
Mm. Yeah, you in your answer, you touched on all of the people who you talked to over the course of this film. You talked to people with the condition, you talked to their loved ones, their family, friends, and you talked to experts who have dedicated their lives to researching this and to addressing the issue. And you have a lot of people who are telling very vulnerable stories about really difficult experiences. How do you take care of them and yourself, while you're dealing with such difficult material?
Right. And for me, I just come from a place of extreme compassion. And we were, as with the other mental health film I did, Is Your Story Making You Sick? We took each person. We made sure that they knew what they were getting into. And I think it's hard sometimes, even though they could have watched my films, I think people are caught off guard by how hard hitting, to see themselves up on the screen. And so I tried to kind of prepare people for that, and mainly through asking them, why do you want to make this movie? Why do you want to be in this movie? Right. To be famous is probably not the right answer but every single person that we profiled said, I want to help. I want if I can share this incredibly traumatic, vulnerable place that I'm in, then maybe it will inspire other people. And so, there were subjects that were more fragile than others. Like I think Travis, the one who's done 18 deployments, let's see, 10 to Afghanistan and 6 to Iraq. No, so let's see, 7 to Iraq and 1 to Niger. He's a pull yourself up by your bootstraps. He quit drinking on his own. He has a dog nonprofit. He stays busy. And he stays super busy, and he wants other veterans to get up off the couch if that's what they're doing, and really they're depressed or drinking or what have you. And that's his way of coping. And he's done, as someone says in the film, I think Dr. Carol Hendricks says it's almost miraculous that he's as functional as he is. And we tried to very carefully back him up with resources if he wanted to. Like we didn't want to push him too far. We never push unless, they take us there, and he's one of those grit your teeth and I'm going to figure this out on my own. And then you have, Chris Taylor, who, just tells this, incredible story. Whereas Travis didn't really want to talk about, the stuff that we all know happens in wartime. Chris was much more of an open book, and both of them, we've kept in touch with all of them, and are the women who are in the film, Cass and Carrie, and they're all doing, like you'd think they do. I mean, they struggle day to day, but we're always here to help them and make that clear to them. We set up Travis with hyperbaric oxygen therapy in his own town, and counseling and that kind of thing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, a remarkably consistent point is how often you see the people you interview taking their healing and the healing of others into their own hands. And so many of them have enacted solutions or proposed them. One of the ideas that struck me the most was, I think, Tim Taylor, when he says that, you need 6 months onboarding. When you join the Army, you should have 6 months offboarding when you leave to readjust to, your life outside. And yeah, like, were there any surprises in either resonances or differences that emerged for you when you were doing these interviews?
Well, I think surprises in that I'll be candid, it was because of the veterans suffering from PTS that we profile in the film. Um, it was a struggle at times, because you're dealing with a population that folks that are struggling in their lives, and I'm so enthusiastic about my films, it sometimes I have to kind of, I get a course correction, if you will, and they took me, they in turn kind of really, we were really super honest with each other, and it all worked out in the end. I'm kind of, what's interesting is one of the surprises is, I decided to, and I think I was up for a Women's Visionary Award we won Best Documentary at the GI Film Festival, and I was up for a Women's Visionary Award there. I didn't win. The gal who won is an amazing filmmaker, but I decided to kind of make a statement, if you will, Jen, about putting military sexual trauma on par with combat trauma. Actually, the professionals tell me it's harder to treat sexual trauma in the military than even combat trauma, because the perpetrator is someone that you've gone through, basic training with. I mean, when you go in the military, I mean, these are some surprises and things I learned about how they strip you of your previous identity, and that if you make a mistake, it could cost your brother or your sister their life. And so I decided to and I was told by the professionals that it's harder to treat military sexual trauma because it's a form of incest, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned a lot about, sadly, what's not taking place in the military that should be taking place. And that's why I think the film is really resonating with the military community, because it's an epidemic. Sexual assault is an epidemic, particularly among the enlisted, where, I mean, these are not popular things to talk about, but I feel this film is kind of the ultimate form of patriotism, because their lives at stake. Mm-hmm. And when people come home, they're not doing a great job. And we can talk about the VA in a moment and treatments and whatnot. But so I wanted to make it clear to the audience. They passed a law last December, maybe December before, the last one, 2 years ago, that is taking out of the hands of the commanders who gets prosecuted. But it's still not going to help the folks in the film who've previously been assaulted, and they have a lot of work to do. And as Mr. Christensen says in the film, the buck stops with the brass. And then the other big thread in the movie, Jen, as you know, is this undiagnosed brain trauma. And what was interesting is we found sexual assault survivors who had one of whom had sustained a head injury. And, I understand the military's role is to win wars, right? But they knew about the connection between PTS and suicide and undiagnosed brain trauma in 2009. And almost to the veteran that we interviewed, there have been challenges in working with the VA in dealing with their PTS. And let me just say, I would never dissuade anyone from going to the VA. Not all VAs are created alike. There are some that are better than others. But that's where a majority of veterans get their health care, or a lot of veterans, and so we want people to seek out health care. But as Dr. Henrik says in the movie, if you've got a traumatized brain, you're not going to be able to do cognitive therapy or some, which is the two prescriptions that the VA has for PTS are psychopharmaceutical drugs and therapy. So, and there's a very, very small percentage of veterans who are being helped with their mental health issues through the VA. And so we want to expand that. And so we offered some alternative treatments that have not been approved yet, but that are showing incredible promise. That's a really long-winded answer, but
It's a great answer. And it speaks to, I think, that the point that so many of these people are taking their healing into their own hands speaks to some of the systemic issues and, failures to address this issue, appropriately and to the degree it needs to be. The movie's also very careful about terminology. Like we've been saying PTS instead of like what a lot of people might, more recognize as PTSD. And I think that has to do with one of the big messages that I got out of this too is that it's a normal reaction, to the stimulus that you go through or the overstimuli. The science supports it, and yet the system isn't really there yet. In addressing that, do you see a path forward for change that is sort of like beginning, with some of this legislation to address the sexual assault trauma side of this? But what do you see as being necessary to at next? I think that's a huge question. I just realized as I was asking it.
Right. No, it's a great one. And yes, we in terms of language, the person is going through has been through a traumatic thing, and they're not diseased. They've, as Dr. Jane says, I think in this movie, she said, you're going to be forever changed by your traumatic experience. You're never going to go back to the way you were. And I think that's an important recognition. I've thought of myself often, had I been to war, and you kind of want things to go back to the way they were, perhaps, but you just can't. And I think if you accept that and you work with where you are, that's a really good start out of the gate. But when it comes to, and I think Isaac says this in the movie, right? He said, I went to all kinds of therapy, sock puppet, he's so great in the movie. And he said, just sitting down and talking to this peer of his, not a military, but this woman was a counselor with the VA. He said, that changed me as much as anything, which people out there listening, don't stop 5 minutes before the miracle. That's a huge part of what the movie is about. But when you're not feeling great and you're having to do all the work, for instance, I think one of the problems, talking about ways to solve this, is I think the reimbursement rate needs to be higher for therapists. They need to look at alternative therapies, which, as Dr. Jane says, she said, absolutely, we'd be open to MDMA therapy that's just having huge success rates, ketamine, and of course what we profile in the movie is just this incredible neurologist in Tucson. And we wanted, one of the ways we wanted to help Travis is to have this specialized MRI done so he could actually see, that he had this brain dysregulation, if you will. So we actually see him getting the results after the MRI from Dr. Hendricks, and I had a profound impact on him. But that treatment has been in use for decades in Europe with concussion, brain trauma patients in Europe. And she's running a nonprofit now for veterans just because she's so dedicated to it. And we're seeing huge success rate. It's really hard to, even if you go into the VA and complain of night terrors or sleeplessness, or you can't be in big, areas like airports and coliseums and things like that. they don't order an MRI DTI. I mean, if you were to go in and complain of chest pains, they'd order chances are a scan of your heart. And they, I think the first impulse is to put them in therapy and put veterans and service members into therapy and put them on a bunch of drugs. And half the people who need to go to the VA to seek out mental health services because of PTS go. Half of those never go back, and half of the ones that continue to go get help. So, pardon the pun, but there's a real smoking gun there, if you ask me. It's like, and as one VA nurse described it to me, psych nurse described it to me, she said, trying to get the military to change what's available is trying to like turn a battleship. It's like we were I'll just tell you right now, I mean, this is some inside scoop. We interviewed Colonel Capaldi, who's the highest ranking, I believe he's the highest ranking psychiatrist now in the military, or one of the highest ranking. And we wanted someone in uniform, and it took us about a year to get that interview. And we were trying to connect the dots between military strategy and mental health services, and so their answer to that was they had, to their credit, they had clinics. He had a clinic in Afghanistan where if you came out of the battlefield and you were having, you'd seen something terrible, you were having real mental issues, they put you in this clinic. And he said to me, he said, we had a 95% success rate getting service members back out into the field within 2 weeks. And, I thought to myself, and I asked him this, and he didn't really answer it. I said, well, can you really heal a brain in 2 weeks? So unfortunately, war is hell, right? Nobody, you just better hope we're going for the right reasons. And yes, people are going to be damaged, and you just be on top of it, and as Tim said, we spend millions of dollars, or we put millions of dollars of equipment in these kids' hands. We train them, and as Isaiah says in the film, they said, see ya. And he was completely on his own once he got out. So there's some reforms that need to be made. And I refuse to believe, as Senator Gillibrand says in the movie, I refuse to believe that we can't, for instance, reform the sexual assault problem in the military, because that's got to be bad for morale. I'm sorry, that's got to be bad for morale. It's a false notion to think that we can't improve upon that, improve upon PTS, and still not feel, the most ferocious and best fighting, army military in the world. But the other reason we made the movie, Jen, is because there doesn't seem to be a lot of accountability on the part of the military. Kirsten Gillibrand has been working for over a decade to try to get the who's taken to, who's charged with military sexual assault, and they finally got some movement on that. It's not yet clear how much impact that it's going to have, because the commanders really, they're in charge of everything. I mean, they own you, as you know. And when you join the military, you sign your life away. I mean, we met many service members who didn't want to talk to us. I tried very hard to find a male sexual assault survivor in the military, but I could not find one who'd be willing to go on the record. And actually, many, many more men are sexually assaulted in the military than women. Women, there's a higher percentage because there's so much fewer of them. Mm-hmm. So, at any rate, there's not a lot of accountability. I mean, there is some from Congress, but, people can call me unpatriotic if they want, but I believe this film is incredibly patriotic because each and every life is worth saving. And probably the most profound statistic in the whole movie is that we've lost over 30,000 service members from the global war on terrorism to suicide. We've lost 7,000 in the entirety of combat operations in the global war on terrorism. And here's another scoop. It's much, much higher, but I researched this thoroughly to see if we could, the military, I mean, it's really hard. I can appreciate it. There are multiple factors, unfortunately, when someone decides to take their own life. And there are many military members who have taken their lives that no longer identified with the military. The number is much, much higher. And that, to me, that's ultimately why I decided to make the movie, because there's something going on here. And I hope we've shed light on the foundational reasons. And most importantly, the film will help bring about some change.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's a really powerful testament to, the issues that you describe within the system. And it does, I think, have glimpses of the path, the path forward. And I think that's really lovely. Thank you so much for coming to share this movie with us and our patrons. I'm very excited. I have already purchased our copy for the collection, so it will be it'll be in
Thank
our
you.
patrons' hands soon. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, please go to the library and watch it. And they're welcome to reach out to me at hello@franciscauseyfilms.com. And the film is available on Tubi for free. You have to watch ads, I think. The DVD's for sale. It's on multiple digital platforms, including Amazon. And so it's everywhere. Thanks to Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
And
And
MVD Entertainment.
Yeah, I will definitely I'll put a link for folks to find the DVD as well. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been really great.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate it.
Problem. All right, it's time to close this chapter. Thank you.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.